Uber, the car service company, has encountered a logjam with California. The state's Labor Department has ruled that Uber cannot classify its drivers as independent contractors. It wants them instead to be Uber employees, and that could end up costing Uber a lot more money because it has to pay payroll taxes and possibly benefits. Joining us now is Cato Institute policy analyst Mathew Feeney from Washington, D.C. Matt, good afternoon and welcome to Arise Xchange.
Thanks for having me.
So we know where the Cato Institute probably stands on this because you want free markets and limited government. I have a question here is why now should these drivers be considered employees? What is the argument that California is making when for so long they were independent contractors? When you hire a car service, you're not taking out payroll taxes when you hand them cash.
Well, the Labor Commission was ruling on a particular case involving one driver who was claiming that Uber owed her expenses. Now, I do think this is a odd argument to make. It seems to me that Uber is providing technology, but drivers are using their own cars and they're driving whenever they want. It is not a classic, in my mind, employer-employee relationship. Yeah,
when you look at the law, that's what it comes down to, whether it creates an agency. Do you provide your own tools of trade? Do you set your own hours? Are you your own boss?
Yeah, well, it does seem that Uber rideshare drivers are their own boss. I mean, going forward, I think people are going to have to consider the fact that the sharing economy, not just Uber, has introduced some awkward regulatory area here when it comes to whether these people are employees or contractors. We might have to come up with some sort of third designation, or maybe we should think about possibly revising or repealing existing regulations.
Yeah, well, it's certainly true that Uber is very aggressive and sort of in your face of all these governments. They will just show up without licenses, et cetera. They've been accused of all sorts of things, so maybe they're bringing this on themselves a little bit. What do you think is going to happen here? Because when I speak to Uber drivers, they like working for the company. We know this has been wildly successful with consumers, but still there is the issue of protecting employees as well as getting taxes paid to the state.
Yeah, I think long-term it's very unlikely that we'll see every Uber driver having to be classified as an employee as we understand it now. There are other lawsuits in the mix at the moment. We'll have to see how those play out. But I think long-term lawmakers and regulators will have to come to grips with the fact that Uber is a relatively new thing, as is the sharing economy more broadly, and they'll have to address that with revisions or different pieces of the legislation.
Uber says that it may leave the state. Do you believe that, or do you think that this is posturing?
Well, I haven't spoken to anyone at Uber. I don't know. I mean, it would be a huge thing for Uber to leave California, which is, after all, where it first started. But that sort of language shouldn't be surprising given the history of Uber's strategies in the past.
So what has to happen here? Because Uber is not alone. I mean, we have this new sharing economy, places like Airbnb, which is clearly, in some cases, breaking laws regarding hotels and regarding lodging and taxes as well. Is government traditionally very slow to respond to consumer demand?
Oh, well, not just consumer demand, but I think the rise of the sharing economy has really highlighted that lawmakers are really bad at keeping up with changes in technology. I think there used to be very clear distinctions between things like hotels and private homes or private cars and taxis, and the sharing economy is blurring these distinctions.
But what do you also do about liability-related issues? Because you know, if they're all independent contractors and someone gets injured, if you're only going to sue the car company, the individual limo driver, you may not have much recourse. Should the laws also be changed a little bit to address that? Give a little bit here, take a little bit there.
Well, look, some states have directly addressed this issue and passed laws relating to rideshare insurance. I actually wrote a paper at Cato about rideshare safety. I mean, it is something that is being addressed, but I don't think the right approach to this is to reclassify drivers as employees. I think there are ways to address the liability issues without having to do that.
And what about regulations that protect individual taxi companies, for example, that we see in New York City? We're starting to see it on Long Island, where places like Uber are just outright banned. But again, the consumer seems to want it.
No, I think the market has spoken when it comes to the fact that people do like companies like Airbnb and Uber. I mean, the fact is that these companies are not going to go away. The technology is out there. This obstructionist strategy that a lot of regulators and companies are using is really a short-term strategy. It can't work in the long term.
Okay, Matt Feeney from the Cato Institute. We know that Cato Institute has a very specific position on all of this. We appreciate your time in Washington, D.C.
No, well, thank you for having me.